Getting labeled disabled can mess with your head real fast. It can make the future feel smaller, your body feel unreliable, and the life that you knew feel like it belongs to somebody else. But there is a way to stop letting that label run your life. Joe Gonzalez, our guest today, brings a hard-earned look at recovery, addiction, purpose, and what it means to rebuild when your old life is gone. You're going to hear about how the ocean became a place to breathe again for him, how a foundation and an app grew out of that pain, and how taking ownership of your mind can change the way that you face the next fight. Before we get into this episode, though, I want to take a moment to raise awareness for something that's deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians who are impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial will be both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you'd like to learn more or find out how you can support their mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now let's get into today's episode. Hey, Joe, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here.
Yeah, Scott, listen, thanks for the invite. I'm really honored to be here.
Oh, yeah, you bet. Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into your story, telling about what it is that you do now and everything like that, for the listeners who maybe aren't familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, background, I'm a U.S. Navy disabled veteran who, believe it or not, has knocked on heaven's door 3 times and been turned away. In that series of midlife crises, I was able to turn it around and make it a midlife awakening. Found my purpose and started a foundation for other disabled vets to help them heal, just like I did, as well as this really cool little app that's doing some great things. And we'll get into that, and I'll show you, but it's one heck of a project. And I've never been so content in my life once I've, gone through this and chosen this path. It's really taught me a lot about me.
Yeah.
Things I never realized I had in me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I'm starting a startup tech company. What do I know about doing that? I'll tell you, it's like once I commit, there was no stopping me.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I started this podcast, I didn't have a clue what I was doing as far as podcasting goes. I didn't know any of the technical stuff. I didn't know what kind of microphones or cameras or any of the kind of nonsense that I needed. But I was determined to start a podcast and get this story out there and these messages from other veterans and stuff. And so I said, I'm going to figure this thing out come hell or high water. I'll get this thing done. Sure. And here I am probably about 7 years now later. When this episode comes out, it's be about 7 years now that we'll have been doing this podcast. And
7 years.
You just learn more along the way. You just keep teaching yourself and you figure things out. That's kind of life in general, right?
What number podcast is this for you?
This is going to be episode 577.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been doing quite a bit of this.
Yeah. 500. Wow.
Yeah.
Great for you, man. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. But all the stories, we were talking about this before we started recording here, but all the stories from all the veterans and all the folks who are out there helping veterans and everything, they're all important in their own way. To each individual, their story is important to them. And I think it's important to get those stories out there and share a little bit about each person and let folks know that, yeah, you might be going through some crappy times right now, but you're not the only one out there. That may not be in and of itself the most reassuring thing out there, but knowing that someone else has been through the same type of thing that you're going through, they've been in your shoes and they've figured something out. They've not thrown in the towel and just called it quits. They've continued pushing through. Try one thing, hey, it doesn't work, okay, try another thing, and keep trying and trying and trying until you figure out what actually works. And then, as you were just saying, life is good. Life is going well now, and things are getting a whole lot better. And as opposed to if you just kept doing the same thing over and over again, you'd still be in that same spot. And so, that's why I like to share these stories and get them out there to folks, and hopefully it changes some folks and helps them for the better.
No, of course. Listen, I was bedridden for 2.5 years, and my biggest fear was staying that way.
Mm,
I mean, it's all had the last one, which was the most tragic. I was 50 years old. I'm still a young person,
sure.
and the idea of me bed rotting or couch rotting in front of the TV watching Maury was just like a fate worse than death to me. Really,
Yeah,
I am. No way. There's no way that's the last chapter in my life. No way. And that's where it started. Just that, you know, when
yeah,
the water finally tells, look, you're disabled for life, and getting back in the water, it's just not going to happen. It was so inconceivable. I was in the water every day of my adult life, man. Surfing, fishing, I mean, you name it. Not to be in the water. No,
right.
no. And that's where it started. I don't know where I was going with it, but that was my line in the sand. No
Sure.
way. You know, it
Yeah.
took me almost 10 years to get to this place, but as a matter of fact, April 23rd of last month was my 10-year anniversary from the coma. 10 years to the day almost.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And yeah, that was a moment for me. That was those 10 years. And I put it on Facebook and I put that, God, 10 years ago, I was stuck in hot traction, heating tubes. I got my trach tube still. I can't get rid of that. But, just a mess, man. And
Mhm.
angry and bitter. And
So let's kind of get into that because there's been a lot of work that you've done that's been kind of built around the healing aspect of things and finding a purpose and
yeah,
obviously for you the ocean, the water is a big thing to you, and I gotta imagine some of this sense of purpose and this, maybe, I don't know if you want to call it a stubborn mindset that you have. It's like, no, I'm not listening to this doctor. I'm gonna just get it done here. How much of this is coming from your military service, shaping how you handle the pain and
what do you
and the
think?
identity stuff? I'm sure it's a,
Oh,
a pretty big piece of it, right?
all of it. Oh, not
Yeah,
all. I mean, most of it is me. I mean, I'm me. But of course, the military shaped me. Of
yeah,
course, it taught me never to give up. Of course, it taught me the grit that I needed. Of course, but brought it out in me. It's not like I didn't have it, and the military gave me this gift. We all have it.
sure,
It's just in the military, you're forced to use it. Like, no, 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 you're not quitting with us. Yeah, they
sure,
won't. You know, although there are times I just get tired. I mean, you keep pushing, you keep pushing. You gotta understand, even though I may not seem disabled, and that's the thing. I have a breathing disability. My lungs are burnt. My throat is. I have a 9% airway
oh
compared
wow,
to yours. Yeah, that's what I breathe with. That's why I have the trach tube so I could breathe through. And even with those limitations, I'm still blessed because I'm able. You know, I'm talking to you. I'm walking around. I'm not confined to a wheelchair anymore. I I can breathe. I have my limitations, no
yeah,
doubt.
yeah,
You know, I I'm not the young 20-year-old I used to be and knock him all dead. I don't care. Nah, that, he's taking a back seat. I'm taking a back seat to that. However, my drive is still there. My spirit is still there. So my biggest challenge with all this was meeting the new expectations of my limitations without pushing. Part of it was me pushing, I can get over that. No,
yeah,
respect the limitations. And that's what took me a good 6, 7 years to figure out because I kept pushing and pushing. No, man, this is
yeah.
not going anywhere. You got to sync with this and accept it. And to me, that was by far the biggest, toughest challenge because when the word disability gets attached to your name, brother, that's a head game.
It is. Yeah. No, I know that because I mean, I've had that myself. I know I've talked to a lot of people who've had that as well, and it
Yeah,
kind of just flips a switch in your head. It's like, oh, well, I'm disabled now, so there's must be a bunch of stuff I just can't do anymore. But yeah, and to your point, there are probably some things that you can't do anymore.
no,
I can't imagine that you're gonna go, running a marathon or things like that with, breathing issues and that
no,
type of thing. But being okay with that and understanding what those limitations are and adapting to that situation so that you can still do things. It's not like you're bedridden, you can't do anything with your
right,
life ever. You still can get up and go go for a walk maybe, or go outside and enjoy life, and do certain things, getting out onto the water, whether it's fishing or, whatever it is that you end up doing. Those types of things are important to your livelihood and your lifestyle, I should say, and the way that you operate. And you find ways that you can continue incorporating pieces of that in your life. Maybe is it not 100% everything that you used to be able to do? Probably not, but at the same time, does it really need to be? We can do a lot of things still, even though they're not 100% the way we used to do them. I'm not 20 years old either. I can't do the
I
stuff that
know.
I used to be able to do back then.
When I
And I know, right? But that's okay. I think that that's okay. As we get older, we kind of change, and life circumstances happen, and whether it's physical limitations or other things that happen, just keep doing as much as you can, and that way you're not slowing down to the point where you can't do anything, right?
And to your point too, not only like going back to your life, going back to that peace of mind, man.
Mhm.
Because when disability comes into your life, you're like almost segregating in your head. You're segregating yourself like, oh no, I'm not with the normal people.
Yeah.
Whatever the hell that means.
Sure.
Whatever the hell that is. I don't think anybody's normal nowadays. But
No.
no, you look around, it's just normality. No. So, like I said, it's a head game.
It
And
is.
it took me a while to just come to terms with the fact that I am who I am now. Not as before, but in many ways better. And that's the part I didn't know.
Mhm.
That's the part we all just kind of defeat ourselves with. It's like, oh, I can't do it now. I'm like, you may not be doing the same way as before, but
Sure.
you still can.
Yeah, in what ways, just going back to what you were just saying, in what ways do you feel like that you're better than before? I mean, some ways maybe not as much, but in other ways you probably are. But what ways do you see yourself
Oh,
as being
I
better, just
think
to get your
probably
mindset?
the most important thing is my mindset.
Okay.
I've never had a more, I can do whatever the fuck I want. I mean, legally and stuff, but there's nothing stopping me.
Sure.
I've never had that drive. I mean, I've been ambitious. I've won and lost a few fortunes in my life. I mean, I'm no stranger to that, but not like this.
Mhm.
And the beauty of it was before, it was always aligned with money, 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 money. Make the money, get the big house, get that Porsche. Now it's, I don't care about the money. Quite honestly, I could live on a hammock in Thailand for the rest of my life, like a king and not worry about anything. But
Sure.
this, helping others, it's like the old cliche, man. No one's richer than a man who helps another.
Yeah.
That's a millionaire.
Yeah.
That's a billionaire. And I'm doing it exponentially more. If we've helped over 18 vets right now, we've planted 2,500 pieces of coral to help out the coastlines. We say that, to me, that's what our foundation does. We raise money to help other foundations keep doing what they're doing. Paid for by the act, which is really cool. So,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, let's get into that a little bit, because it sounds interesting, and I wanna be able to share a little bit about what it is that you guys do. So tell us a little bit about the foundation and how that all works, and what that's about.
first of all, the foundation is called Mother Ocean Fund. And what we do is we raise money for ecological and humanitarian scuba diving efforts at sea. Things like coral reef restorations, turtle and dolphin rescues and release excursions, shark tagging, debris cleanup stuff on the reefs, both on shore and in the water. Things like this, other organizations do, but I want to amplify it to make a bigger impact. That's a foundation.
Okay.
How we funded is an app that I came up with called Aquatic Tribe. It's a marketplace app, very similar model to Airbnb. You know how they play the middleman between a landlord and a tenant? Well, we're playing a middleman with every dive shop operator and diver, so they could look up the schedules much easier. Instead of you spending hours calling, you can get on my app, and within minutes, you can find all the dive shops, who's going out, what times, the types of dives, the difficulty levels, and such. And the proceeds from that fund the nonprofit. So it's a circular model where philanthropy and commerce come together for a common good.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a cool little project, and it came to be, well, through a vision that I had. when I was using ayahuasca.
Okay.
She put this together for me. She painted the whole picture. She showed me a lot about my past and how I was behaving and why I was behaving the way I was behaving. And two, what would it be like if I let all that go and what my life could look like? And I'll tell you, man, that was like, boom.
Mm-hmm.
I saw, she showed me the whole picture. It's like, I can do this. You're going to do this. And from that being forth, brother, I was all in. That was 8 years ago.
Okay.
8 years ago. No, or 7 years ago. Sorry, 7 years ago. And I'll tell you, ever since, it just, sometimes I put in, 10 minutes a day because it's all I had in me. Sometimes I do it 10 days straight. But whatever, I never stopped. Little by little. Sometimes, because you got to understand with this thing, it's continued maintenance. So I've had 14 surgeries since April 2016. And each one has laid me up between a few weeks to a few months. It depends on the aggressiveness of the surgery,
Sure.
And
yeah, and that goes back to respecting those boundaries and limitations of what you can and can't do. You can't expect right after a major surgery like that you're going to just be able to bounce right up the next day and be able to be
well, my
at
ego
100%.
thought though.
Yeah, sure.
Well, no, I'll be fine. Well, sit down.
Right.
Sit down.
Right.
And luckily enough, the work that I'm doing is on the computer. I can developing an app. So a lot of that, I did most of it in bed anyways. Just okay, put on my lap and I could do what I can do, man. Like I said, 10 minutes some days 10 days straight.
Sure.
10 hours a day. It depends. It just depends.
Yeah. And so all of this stuff is a big piece of who you are, based on the conversation just so far, that you can tell that being out in the water, the oceans and things like that are very important to you. And that is something that kind of drives you and motivates you. But I think the kind of takeaway from all of that is for, the listeners, not everyone's going to have that same passion for the oceans and whatnot, but there's something that you could probably find that you are passionate about, and you can work towards bettering that environment, or, whether it's, a nature thing, kind of like what you're talking about, or, a, activity or something that really motivates you and drives you and gets you out of bed and makes you feel, passionate and energized. Those types of things are the stuff that we're trying to look for. So, you kind of have to keep your eyes open for those things and it may even be something that you've never done before. There may be something completely new, and you just have to be open to opportunities that might come your way.
Listen, like the old cliche in business goes, find a need, find a pain in a business or industry. There's always a way to do it better, more efficient, faster, cheaper. There's always a way. Just keep your eyes open, keep that mentality, just look and you'll find it. You'll find your gap. You will. That's how the universe works. You just keep thinking about it and it will come to you. I didn't go to it. It found me.
Yeah.
And then building this, it's amazing, the creative process, man. I never knew I had it in me. I really didn't, You got to realize, I was a DJ and a bartender in South Florida and in South California in the 80s. So imagine, and now I live in the Keys. If I have 2 brain cells left, during all that time, I'd be impressed. So when this came out, it's like, I'm going to develop an app, and I'm going, what? Open a foundation? What? And it was incredibly intimidating. Incredibly. I've never done any of this. But somehow, I mustered through it, and I swear to you, I know it sounds it's like I had a cosmic ratatouille on my head, and he's pulling the strings. I'm like, oh, this works. Oh, wow, look at that. And it started to connect.
Sure.
I started with the simple search engine, registration portal, and the payment. That was version 1. Now I'm on version 6 with all sorts of other aspects. Like, how did this come to be? I can't believe I did this. It's like, I'm telling you, man, I'm merely a conduit for this thing.
Sure.
We're just trying to grow. Once you dedicate your time and your effort, every thought in your being on it, it's done. It's done.
Sure.
It's just a matter of time. It's done. And that's what I've got to keep reminding myself, because I get impatient. You know, I want to be the next Facebook tomorrow. You know, just like any other entrepreneur, you know?
Sure.
For me, it's not about the money. It's about the impact we can make. I want to throw up. Hey, we saved 10,000 VA, 10,000 vet this month. 50,000 pieces of coral last week got planted because of our efforts. That's what I want to see.
Yeah.
The money will come, you know. I'm not even worried about that.
Sure.
But if we're aligned with what our purpose is and we're meeting those edges, I'm good.
Well, and something else that you had mentioned earlier on is when you are out in the water, you're diving, you're scuba diving and all that, and if you can figure out a way to remain calm while you're underwater and kind of a, you know, unpredictable environment. There's sea life and there's other things going on down there that, it's scuba diving isn't without risks. There's
No,
obviously
of
some
course
some
not.
risks
Of
there.
course not.
And,
No.
if you can figure out ways to remain calm and, under that type of pressure, then that mindset starts to shift. And then maybe you can start shifting that to when you get onto shore and when
Oh,
you're back on
absolutely.
solid ground and living your normal day-to-day life. Now, when you're taking people out through the Mother Ocean Fund, is part of the purpose, like, to offer some sort of healing and therapeutic benefit through that for them as well? Yeah, okay.
You nailed it on the head. You got to understand, and this is the sad part about scuba diving. Only 1% of the world population scuba dives
Mm,
compared to surfing. It's 13%. Fishing, it's like 22, 24%. You know, and every other water sport is double digits. Scuba diving, people say it's because of the fear, which I don't believe that to be the case. Because if that were the case, you wouldn't be on the water at all. You
sure,
wouldn't be hoping. You wouldn't. You know, it's not the case at all. What it is just people haven't been exposed to it. And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand. Scuba diving is a lot more than just a sport. Mother Ocean heals. Bottom line.
yeah,
All the de-inflammation possibilities that the salt water has, the calming, the soothing, where we're just locked into what you're doing. Obviously, because you have to. You have to know, check your gauges and make sure your levels are right. Make sure you're descending and not ascending in a certain way. Every 30 feet, you got to take a break. I mean, there's all these things that are going on, and you think you'd be stressed about it, but you're not. Once you understand the rules, you're flying,
yeah,
and you're feeling so much more, not just calm, grounded, and within yourself. You're looking at you. It's like you're trusting yourself. The environment, sure, they're dangerous. Around every corner, there's something. Absolutely. But I never feel threatened. I've
mhm,
had some close calls. I'm not gonna lie. I could tell you some diving stories, but at the same time, you know, you're enveloped in Mother Ocean's grace, and it just covering you and protecting you at the same time, and giving you the confidence you need to withstand whatever comes at you, you know. I'm not
yeah,
taking big risk either, you know. I'm not
sure.
one of these guys who's, trying to feed a shark. That's not my game. I don't know why it's ridiculous. I respect it, leave it alone.
Sure, sure. Yeah, again, there's limitations. There's limitations to what you're
Oh,
willing to do. Other people, maybe they have a little more risk tolerance than you might have, but they're willing to go out there and have that kind of adventure. But, there's certain things that you wanna do, certain things you don't wanna do, and, as long as you're able to do the things that you wanna do and able to, make a way for it to work, then, you're all good there. So,
yeah. I
so
would
that's
so
awesome.
recommend it to everybody. And the thing is, scuba therapy, what we do with these adaptive divers, you take off, say with veterans, women and children, kids with autism, people that are, confined to wheelchairs, and the pressure that they have in a wheelchair, the gravity, it's painful.
Mhm.
It's incredible on their backs, on their joints. When they get in the water, all of that is gone.
Yeah,
So they could finally, for once, ever, just be themselves and focus on them,
yeah,
which is a huge step forward in your confidence, in your mindset. I mean, it it enables you.
mhm,
It reinforces who you really are down to your core. It's
sure,
good about that when you got all these challenges in your life. I
mhm,
know I did. Feeling sorry for myself, the depression, the anger, all that eats you up. It
yeah,
makes you physically even worse. And that's, of course, that's my other side of the story. Addiction,
mm,
epilepsy, and that, I mean, I went down the opiate trail from my last absence, started off with Propalops and then graduated to, I think, what's it? Morphine and another thing, and then oxycodone and Vicodin, and I was going, and I got hooked, man. I got hooked. It was first time ever, you know.
Yeah.
And look, I'm no stranger to the party. I mean, I'm not, but this, nah, this was very different. This was very.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, and it's unfortunate too when something like that happens. You know, there's, you go in for, you having an issue with some sort of pain, or whether it's after a surgery or an accident or an injury, something happens, right? And a lot of times these doctors are prescribing certain medications, and you know growing up you're kind of taught to trust the doctors, and
Whoa.
whatever it is that they are prescribing to you or telling you to do, you kind of
Okay.
you just trust them to that they're right, and then you go down that path and you end up finding yourself addicted to something, and it's like that's not what the doctor intended, I'm sure, but that's
Did
what
you
ends up
see that?
happening.
Oh, did you see that? Or did you hear about that documentary about the opiate crisis
Yes,
on
yeah,
Netflix? Did you
yep.
watch?
I I didn't. My wife did. She told me a little bit about it, and it was interesting. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Look, at the time, I live in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Yeah.
That's Broward County, Florida. That documentary reported that more prescriptions were written for oxycodone in Broward County than the entire nation.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Double the prescriptions were written by doctors. I mean, and I didn't notice this until I started driving down the street when I was able to drive and started noticing pain clinic practically on every other corner, like McDonald's.
Mhm.
They were everywhere. I was like, look at this. And the amount of people out in front waiting to get in or getting their appointments or whatever it is they're waiting for. Hundreds
Yeah.
in the parking lot, just hanging out, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee. I guess waiting to get their number called us or whatever it is. What?
Too
And
much,
then I
yeah.
say, you put your trust in the medical community. And when it comes to the bottom line, greed, it'll surpass anybody's moral compass. It's just
Good, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I wanna switch gears just a bit here and talk about your book that's gonna be coming out in a little bit here. I know you're kinda going back and forth with the publisher at this point on some edits and stuff, so it's not out right now as of the time of this recording, but it'll be out in a little bit.
the transcript is out. You could download it. You could
Okay,
download the PDF. You could,
okay,
but the hardcover and the audio book and the Kindle book and all that. That's coming out soon.
okay.
That's coming out soon.
So the book again,
It's called Love That Doesn't Sharpen Spoils.
okay,
It's a memoir about my last 20 years. Those three major tragedies I had in my life that started to shape me.
okay,
And sometimes for the worse, to be honest with you, I'm not going to lie. But then eventually I learned the lessons that they brought me. And everyone brought me a lesson. Of course, at the time, I had no idea what they were. It took over a decade of me constantly trying to figure this out because I didn't want to live like this. One thing I knew certain, that this chapter was not going to be the last one in
sure.
my life. There's no way I'm going to go out like this. No way. Dead rotting and all that. No, that wasn't me. So how I was going to get here, I had no idea. But somehow I was going to get here. And here I am.
Sure. Well, and that's great, and I think again the message that you're talking about here is a good reminder to folks that you can make it through no matter what you're going through. There's somebody else who's probably gone through that too, and you can use their journey, their story as kind of like a roadmap for yourself, and try to
No,
work through things. Maybe not exact, 100% follow those
no,
same footsteps, but make it your own, and kind of
yeah, of course.
realize there's hope for you too. It's not just the end of the road, like you were saying. There is some hope out there, and you just got to figure it out, on your way through. So
No, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, too, at the bottom, at the end of it all, you got to love yourself
yeah,
enough to pull this off. Because if not, you got to realign your judgment. You'll never make it.
hmm
If you got doubts and you won't. You're planning to fail already. So to do that, you got to take a good look look at yourself and, well, forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And then, ask for forgiveness from others. And if they tell you to, go to hell, then all right, that's on them. And they will. And
Yep.
they will. Not everybody is ready for that. And that's fine. You don't have to be, but you
Sure.
are. That's all that matters.
Right, and I think to that point is, so long as you are the one doing the forgiving, doesn't mean you have to be okay with whatever happened. You
Yeah,
can still have, forgiveness, and you can, in that way, you can kind of just let go of those things so that it's not holding you back and being a hindrance to yourself. You start doing those types of things, it makes life overall that much better for you because you're not stuck in the past. You're not stuck hanging on like a, rock, tied to your leg and dragging you down.
sure.
You're able to be a little bit more free, break free from the chains that might hold you back, and you can move on. And if someone else wants to stay back because they're stuck back there, well, that's not on you. That's on them.
Well, I hear you. I know. And that's everywhere. Both friends, neighbors, family, whatever. Everybody's going to be that way.
Yeah.
And it's funny how, and I know it sounds kind of bad, but the more you go down this road, the more you find yourself on the right path, the less people will tolerate you.
Mm,
That's certain. So your circle's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm okay with that too,
sure.
by the way. It's like, okay, it actually really shows you who your friends are.
Well, it does, and it goes to the mindset of quality over quantity. You have of the people in that smaller circle, it's probably a lot higher quality group of people than,
Yeah,
if you just had a big open circle and it had, tons and tons of people in it.
sure.
The quality will be diminished. Yeah, sure, you'll have more people, but are those really the people that you want to be hanging around?
Well, yeah, I know. And it's hard, because you've known them all your life.
Sure.
Yes, you got 20 years, 30 years with him. What I mean, for our age, only thing is, I do miss him, but I don't. And that's fine with that. This new person's like, get over it.
Yeah,
This is,
sure.
once you find your purpose, that's a very dangerous place to be for a man.
Yeah,
You're unstoppable.
it is,
You
and you don't want anyone getting in that way either. You don't
no,
want people
absolutely.
who are gonna, try to hold you back or
Yeah,
come up with any kind of
of
excuses
course
for you
not.
not to pursue whatever it is that your purpose
Yeah, because
is,
listen,
you know?
it's a very tough road
Yeah.
as it is. You know, there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that you have to overcome. And the last thing you want is somebody adding to that.
Mhm.
I'll take on the industry challenges. I'll take on the technical challenges of those. Okay, I knew that's coming, and I'd rather put my energy and effort and thoughts into that.
Yeah.
That's what's most important right now. And if nobody's aligned with that, I'll do it solo, but I'm going
Mhm.
to do it. You'll hear about this.
Yeah.
This is going to be a cool project.
It sounds like it, and I would just wanna go back again, just circle back on something that you were talking about before, is that mindset piece that is such a big driver for you and such a big change in your life, and just hearing you talk the last couple minutes here about your mindset, basically no one's gonna get in your way, you're gonna get this done, even if you gotta do it yourself, you're gonna get it done one way or the other, and I think enough people are out there who don't have that mindset, who are are finding themselves stuck because they're feeling like they're the victim, that they're owed something, that something is wrong, or someone has wronged them, I should say, and all things are going wrong in this person's life, and it just drags them down, and they don't have that
And listen,
mentality.
I had that too. No, no, no,
Yeah,
no. Hang on. I had that too. Believe me,
sure.
for years. For years. I was pissed, blaming the world. And it's like, and every time I point the finger, three fingers point back at me.
Right,
You
right.
know? And it's like, saying that is one thing, but truly trying to understand is like, shit. City. I remember, I'm reminded of an interview I saw about Denzel Washington, the actor,
Mhm.
who he just got off doing the Hurricane, the boxer movie.
Yep.
And the guy was doing 3 workouts a day for like 6, 8 hours a day, to bulk up, to get ready for that role. And he got chiseled, he got really big. So the reporter asked him, he says, Was that your toughest physical role? It's all nowhere near. No. The toughest role I played was the bone collector. When he sat perfectly still for 6, 8, 10 hours a day and just him and his thoughts. He says, my God, that was by far the most physically challenging role I ever had to do. And he's absolutely right. To
Interesting.
face yourself, okay, that is incredibly difficult, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to look at yourself. You don't want to look down on yourself, but you don't want to analyze the real you, your weaknesses, your inabilities. I think that is a hard pill to swallow, my friend.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
for anybody, man, woman, young, old, whatever.
Yeah.
So that by far was my biggest pill to swallow. It took, God, 6 years to finally really, and even when I had these lessons, even when I doing my ayahuasca, I was, I had these dreams and all these things that I went through. So I was so stubborn. No. That's the drugs. That's the oxy talking. No, dumbass. Listen, truly digest what's being presented to you. It's you. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That's tough.
It is.
But
And we can be our own worst enemies, and very often we are.
of
And
course,
it's until you figure out that mindset that you're talking about, that you're able to maybe push through. And it, not to say that you don't have those days where you have those kind of thoughts come through, because I'm sure we all do. And but when you figure out your way to push past that, then the whole world opens up to you, and you're able to look at it like, I can accomplish anything now. Like, no one's getting in my way, and I'm going to do this.
that's what I call the landlord principle, which is in my book.
Okay.
I I look at mental illness or mental disabilities or mental as bad roommates in your head,
Hmm.
and I'm the landlord. I have to take that ownership.
Sure.
Now, the switch is easy. You can understand the framework. However, keeping up with that's a challenge because those roommates are never going to leave. My
Hmm.
disability is never going to leave. My addiction, never going to leave. I still get called. I still get that feeling. And I got some. Got some opti sitting in my cabinet. Haven't touched it, but it calls. Hey, maybe I should take half a dab or just a little something. Taking ownership of your faults
Hmm.
is also, we want to admit they have faults, but understanding that they're there and then taking that and twisting it around and using that edge to help you build something, a friend. That's what this book is all about. Converting your chaos into purpose. And you can't do it without purpose. Don't even think about trying this road without having a purpose, or at least beginning to look for one.
Sure.
Getting your mind into that, because you will always have the purpose to leverage yourself on those tough times, because so you're going to get it.
Hmm.
I saw this thing on, I think it was TikTok, about, you ask God for courage. He gives you battles,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so you learn how to fight. You learn
Right.
us, And the more courage you want, the more battles he's going to throw at you.
Right.
You want strength? He's going to kick your ass. He's going to knock you down. Get up. That's how it works. With enough ass kickings that I've taken, man,
You do.
no
Yeah.
quite a bit,
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, is that you are going to experience some hardships, and it's just a matter of what you do with those things. And do you grow from them, or do you let them beat you down? And
See, that's the edge. See,
yeah.
that's exactly what I mean. You either let it kill you or grow you. That's the ego.
Mhm.
That's the double-edged sword we all carry. You know, if you let the ego's a very important tool. Believe me, the ego saved my life many a time. The thing about the ego is it gives you that sense of overcoming.
Mhm.
You're not gonna let this take me. I mean, I almost drowned here in Lake Atlantic, that we call it. And I swear to you, I was down scuba diving, lobster hunting, about 20 feet out, 2 peerlings out that we swam out, and my O-ring popped. I'm 20, 25 feet underwater with about 60, 70 pounds of dead weight, no air, and I'm 2 pure lengths out. And I'm trying to swim up, trying to get to the top, and I'm fading, and I'm fading. And in my head, it kicked in. It's like, hey, you're going to read that tomorrow's paper read that a seasoned scuba diver with 30 months, something years of experience is going to die in 20 feet of water? Well, stupid, you're going to look. Well, click. I just muscled my way up to the top. I mean, seriously, that's the ego.
Yeah.
That's the ego. That's the one it saved my life. And I've been in many scrapes in my life. Same thing. Same thing. That's what up. It's the ego that drove me to drive this mission. It's my ego that pushed me to write that book. It's the ego that made me build this in the hospital bed. So it's privileges.
Sure.
However, if you let it monopolize every one of your thoughts, you make your personality all ego. Well, I don't need to tell you where that goes. Just look around.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing good will come if that's your whole entire personality, right?
Of course. We are like surrounded by him right now. Like everybody's fetching this alpha problem. Yes. Yeah, it's everywhere. And watch him self-destruct.
Yeah.
They literally, you watched him self-destruct in front of your very eyes. And that's not a road I want to go down either.
No, for sure. And I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning thinking, hey, you know what, that's a path I want to take. I want to go down that path of self-destruction. But they end up down there sometimes.
But the thing is, we don't even see it.
Yep.
We don't even see it while we're in it. You know? You think the Andrew Tates, the drumsticks, they're on a very dangerous path for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, they're spreading that hatred because they have the $1 million microphone. All the eyes are on men and spreading that vileness to the younger generation. And that's where I'm stepping in. And you'll see me, Scuba Joe 11. I'm going after Tate. I'm going after these big mouths and showing up, look, to their people, because they're a bunch of young men. And they glorify these knuckleheads, what I call them. And I'm coming right at them. Is that really? Look, from a broken old vet, I can still kick your ass. Just showing them.
Sure.
That just will kill me. I mean, he's a botcher, but I'm talking like from the purpose of life, what's really important. I'm running circles around you, and I haven't done anything yet. And that's what I want to show these young boys too. You know, this is not the way.
Absolutely.
For me, my application, our application, to do something better for the next generation.
Yeah,
we all have that.
Yeah, absolutely. For the listeners who are interested in learning more about the Mother Ocean Fund and everything that you're doing there, or your book or anything like that, where can they go to find out more information, whether it's volunteering or participating in some of the programs, any of that?
Are you going to put the links? I'm sure you're going to put the links in the bio, right, or something?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yep. But the name of the company is called Mother Ocean Fund. That's a foundation. And the app is aquatictribe.com. So it's motheroceanfund.org and aquatictribe.com. And if you want to get the book, it's in our Mother Ocean Fund store. It's the first item. You'll see it along with a bunch of t-shirts and hats and stuff that we sell to raise money. And we do events too. We do happy hours, poker tournaments, and music festivals and farmers markets on local beaches. So if you follow us on Facebook, we're everywhere. Every social media platform. All the big ones. Facebook, IG, TikTok, Threads, YouTube. You'll see us. And we'll start announcing when our next events are. We'd love to have you. These are all fundraisers. And then they're a blast. We're partying for a purpose. It's basically what it is. Down here in the Key. And soon in San Diego. Where are you, by the way? I forgot to ask.
I'm in Arizona, so pretty.
Okay.
Not exactly the best place for scuba diving, but.
Well, there are rivers. That's not true. There's rivers, the Colorado River.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I haven't seen. There's good diving there. No, there's shots. There's shots everywhere. There's water.
Yeah,
but there's a body of water. My tribe is there, brother. We are there. No, it's quite an evolutionary sport, man. Because it will change you.
Sure,
absolutely. The ocean heals. Bottled water heals. And that's what we're trying to do. Just bring that healing back to her. Because she so needs it.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
We
Well,
don't need to get into the conditions of our waterways nowadays. And that's when it's all fixed. That is, you know.
sure. Yeah, and every little bit helps, I'm sure, and, that's what you're doing and getting people out there to experience some of that on their own as well. So, um,
Nut.
you know
And it's really rewarding too. That's my payment,
yeah,
That's what pays me.
that's great.
Whatever comes from it comes, but that's what I want to see more.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and everything that you're doing, nowadays and how your mindset changed, all that information I think is just really great for some of the listeners who might be struggling with that mindset piece of it themselves. And whether it's getting out in the water or finding something that suits them, I think is really important. And so I definitely appreciate you coming on, sharing your time and your story, and also your dedication to the conservation efforts and all that stuff. I think is
Thank you.
definitely inspiring. So thanks so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And remember, one last thing, perception is everything. That's the key. It's right here. No matter how bad you have it, how bad you feel like your back's against the wall, or you're laid out flats, or you're 20 feet under like I was. It's all in the air, baby.
Okay.
It's all in the air. All right. Thank you very much
Absolutely.
for having me. Appreciate you.
All right, thank you.